Hello, everyone. Sunday afternoon. I'm going to set myself a goal to get all these videos out by Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, so you have them for a full 5 days before class. So it's Sunday afternoon. We are just entering week 2 of the new quarter. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to look at the videos, 2 of them that I put up there on chapters 1 and chapter 2. You've also hopefully had the opportunity to look through the chapters in your ebook. Hopefully I'm looking good today. This is a new device that I just got. I don't know if I told you guys in class about the lost package that I had. Well, somebody delivered it to my house on Saturday afternoon. So what we're going to be doing this week, we're going to be talking about research methods and theory development. That is the topic of chapter 3. It gets into how criminologists do their research so that they can, present their findings, which ultimately will either inform us as to reasons for a variety of things going on in the field of criminal justice and criminology, but may also point us towards potential policy changes that might have to take place to maybe reduce the crime problem. So in this week's lecture, that's what it's going to be all about. I know that most of you talking about becoming practitioners in the field of criminal justice, you may not be involved in a lot of research, although you never know. When you get into various parts of police departments, if you're involved in crime prevention, if you're involved in planning, as you go up through the ranks in your career, there may be times when research becomes very important to you. So don't discount this as saying, hey, I'm never going to do research as a criminal justice professional. Some of you also are interested in going on for bachelor's, possibly master's, or beyond, and research is going to be very important as you progress academically. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are seeing this as a standalone short video, just be aware it's going to be attached to the lecture, the chapter lecture, and posted officially. And I'm going to post a link through the Edmodo page. I know some of you are directly linked, subscribed through my YouTube channel. Some of you are getting my Google Plus notifications. Some of them are getting Twitter. And when I post to the YouTube, it's going through Twitter and YouTube and posting onto Facebook as well. So you may see this as a standalone. I know some other folks that I know are seeing this, and hopefully you'll all be informed. So what we're going to do in class this coming week is, obviously we're going to be discussing this particular topic, but we want to look at it from a more practical perspective. Answer any student questions that you have. Remember, I told you in class on Friday that as you're watching these lectures, some of you will develop questions. And it's my recommendation that you have a notebook of some kind handy, or it's a tablet. See, I got one right here, so that I can write down my notes. If I have any things that I think of during the discussion, during the lecture, I may think of things I want to do in class that I don't want to forget, because oftentimes we'll think of things, even you young people may think of something that you want to ask in class, and then you'll totally forget about it by the time you get to class on Friday. So get yourself, I'm sure you all have some kind of notebook anyway, so have a dedicated notebook for this class, and when you're doing the lectures, make sure that you are writing stuff down that you have questions for, because part of our interaction with regard to criminological research will be based upon your questions. Certainly I'll throw out some essential questions with regard to the topic, and maybe cover in more depth a couple of things that I know people always have problems with, as well as the homework assignment that is based upon this particular lecture that's coming up, and your project. So our class on Friday will be certainly discussing your homework assignment, the media and public perceptions of crime, doing a quick review of chapters 1 and 2, what is criminology and how do we measure that crime, introduce course project to you, then get into any questions that you have with regard to this particular lecture, and then I want, as I told you, you to see specifically what researchers produce and then I want you to pick one. You're going to research. You're going to look at it. You're not going to do any research. You're going to look at this particular report that you select out of one of the periodicals that I will give you access to, and you're going to review it and then summarize it in your own words, like a 1 to 2 page document, which you'll then, after you're done that thing, I'll give you about a half an hour to produce your summary. You'll come back to class, at which time we're going to have a discussion based upon the National Review article that I'm going to have you read this week. That'll be posted in the Edmodo page, so you'll have read the article before you come to class, and we're going to discuss the use of data. How is research data used? Research and data used. How is it used properly? And how does it inform us as to how the importance of making changes in our society, in the way we do criminal justice, the way we do policing, corrections, courts, what have you. This information and data hopefully can be used to make the professions better, and make it better for all, whether it's better for the victims, better for people that get arrested and are eventually incarcerated, because the goal is that our society, that everybody gets along together, which is probably a lofty goal, but we would like to have that goal met at some point in time. So we're going to discuss that article as it addresses police shootings of suspects, specifically African American males, as is the topic of the day right now. Killings of police officers, which is also a big topic, especially within the police community. We kind of feel that we're under attack. And we're also going to talk about other issues in which data has been used and research has been used. Certainly applicable to this discussion is what's going on in the presidential race, and how each of the presidential candidates uses data to promote their case. And sometimes it's very interesting that people will use the same data and draw different inferences from it. So we want to look and discuss about that. And then you'll have time to work on the week's writing assignment, which is about a researcher by the name of Mary who's doing a research project. And you're going to have to answer a couple of questions about that, understanding, which is going to show your understanding of a couple of the concepts that are addressed in this lecture. So it's very important that you try your best to understand the concepts. If you don't understand the concepts, like when we talk about primary research or secondary research, if you don't get it, then you need to ask the question. If you don't understand what applied research is versus pure research, when we get to that in a discussion, please make sure that you ask the question, because the homework assignment and successfully completing that homework assignment and getting the best grade for it requires you to understand those concepts. So look out for them. Applied research, pure research, primary research, secondary research are important concepts that you have to understand when you're going through this lecture, and certainly while you're reading the chapter, which I know you're all doing. So without any further ado, I'll close this introductory video and we'll go right into the actual lecture. Good afternoon and welcome to Chapter 3 in our criminology class, Research Methods and Theory Development based upon Criminology, an integrative introduction by Frank Schmaliger. PowerPoint presentation created by Ellen Cohn, PhD, and presented to you today by Frank Plunkett. So, as I stated in the introduction, we're going to be discussing how do criminologists do their research? What is the importance of research? What do they base their research on? And hopefully, some of you it will spark an interest, because you might want to know, well, where do they come up with that information? When I see, a study was recently released in the news that said that 50% of people from Mars are more likely to commit crimes than people from the moon. How do they come up with that information? So that's what we're going to be discussing today and in our class on Friday. Please make sure you have your ebook handy. If you obviously are watching this on the same device, you may not be able to look at them both at the same time. I understand that. If you happen to have two devices, like a computer, or you can hook up a separate screen, maybe you can do them both at the same time. But at the very least, make sure you take notes during the lecture. then go back to your textbook and review sections, especially those that you need to understand better. As I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be presenting concepts like what's a theory, what is a hypothesis, types of research like applied research versus pure research, primary versus secondary research, and those are different categories. So that it gets a little confusing there, and I want to make sure that everybody understands those concepts as we go forward. So make sure whatever questions that you have, whatever you don't understand, that you take notes on it during the lecture, and also make sure that you go back to your ebook and review the material so that you have a better understanding of it. And then you can bring those questions up in our classroom session. Alright, so the science of criminology. John Laub said there were 3 specific eras of research. This is like the historical perspective. There was a golden age of research from 1900 to 1930, where people were looking at a lot of things and maybe not coming up with a lot of ideas about causes, but they were doing a lot of research. Golden age of theory would be a time when a lot of different theories came out, suggesting that crime was caused for a variety of different reasons. And when we actually look at those theories, you can see, based upon whoever came out with them and the time that they came out with these theories, whether they happen to concur with these time frames. There are some theories we're going to talk about that actually came out before these time frames, and certainly others after. Empirical testing of dominant theories, 1960 to 2000. It's when people started looking at using the scientific method and try to really do testing to find out if there was validity to the theories. And the 21st century, which we are in obviously right now, contains all the possibilities of what came before, and as they say, the offspring of what came before. As I mentioned in our previous class, Adrian Raine, who is a professor over at University of Pennsylvania, has done some really awesome work on brain studies and how the brain is a factor in crime. But he also does a fantabulous job, and I highly recommend that his book that I showed you in class last week does a fantastic job of making connections from his brain studies and the potential for damage to the prefrontal cortex of the brain, or congenital damage from that somebody might have from birth, or from a parent who used drugs during pregnancy, injuries, all those things connected to what is going on in society and other things that might impact person. So he doesn't look at it solely as biological. When we look at the biological theories, you'll see that a lot of these folks that were studying biology of crime, they thought, well, this is the end-all be-all, it's because. Where Raine looks at, okay, there's definitely a biological component, but it's also affected by these other components. So our 21st century, there's a lot that's going to happen as far as the study of crime. And hopefully it's all for the good and can help us to really make good policy decisions later on to contain the crime problem and eliminate maybe the crime problem. We shall see. Scientific criminology is the systematic collection of related facts, emphasis on the scientific method. Those of you that may be familiar with chemistry and physics and other sciences, this is the application of the methods that one might use in those sciences to study criminology. Not just somebody saying, well, I saw, five Martian guys walking down the street and then all these cars were broken into. We're just going to assume that happened. No, we're going to take some scientific method and look at these cases very, very strictly. And I use Martian guys because I don't want to offend anybody. Because certainly that's our world right now, is everybody's offended. If I said 5 black guys, 5 white guys, 5 Hispanic guys, 5 Asian guys, one of those groups would say, well, why are you picking on us? So even though it would be totally random on my part, Let's just use people that we don't think exist yet, so they can't come back and complain. So anyway, scientific criminology is using that scientific method so that we can, and we're going to get into more detail about how that works, we can have a objective view of what's going on. So we have general laws, field of experimentation or observation, control of academic discourse, and I'm going to be showing you some what we call juried documents, that referee documents, that people in the field look to make sure that the quality of the research does in fact exist before it gets published. So we're going to look at that. Criminology slowly being accepted into the scientific tradition, and certainly a worthwhile subject. I love criminology. I think it's a wonderful topic, and certainly from the perspective of a police officer with 25 years of service and now like 5 or 6 years in the academic area of criminal justice, the study of criminology is, to me, extremely important, because this is where hopefully we're going to find the solutions. We talked about in the first chapter, what is criminology, and what do our powers that be, whether it be the president, the Congress, whomever, they come up with an idea and just run with it, which possibly may not have any basis in real fact. So we want to take a look at that. Criminology can hopefully solve some of our problems that we have as far as crime today. All right, theory building. Ultimate goal of criminological research: we want to construct a theory or model that improves our understanding of criminal behavior and help us create effective strategies to deal with the crime problem. So through all of our research, we want to come up with a working theory that can help us to better understand what's going on, and hopefully help us to create policy that's going to eliminate or reduce the crime problem. A theory is a series of interrelated propositions that attempt to describe, explain, predict, and ultimately control some class of events. So when a researcher or an academic comes up with a theory, they have a whole bunch of interrelated things that are going to try to describe what's going on, explain what's going on, predict future events, and hopefully, if we really do have a good working theory, that maybe we can control things that go on in the future because we understand them better and what's causing our problems. Uses of theories: provide us patterns for interpreting data. So if we have a theory, then maybe we can look at the data and it gives us a perspective to help us better understand the data. Theory helps us to link different studies together. Supplies us frameworks within which concepts and variables have special significance. So it helps us, if we have the theory and then we see various concepts, the theory helps us to better understand them and gives them more significance. And also allows us to interpret the larger meaning of whatever we do find in our research. So the role of research, and you're going to be doing some what I would call secondary research as part of your project for this class. But the role of research is the use of standardized systematic procedures in the search for knowledge. In other words, we want to make sure that we're getting the right answers and that we're not making assumptions based on inaccuracies. And that's why you use a standardized systematic procedure, so you make sure that you eliminate things that might confound your data. Now there's two basic types of research, and that's pure research, which is conducted to advance knowledge. In other words, me, Johnny the researcher, I want to know why a certain thing occurs. And I just want to know why it happens. And I'm going to conduct research to find out the answer. So it might advance my knowledge, but it's not necessarily going directly into any kind of solution to a problem. Maybe later on down the road, if somebody looks at my research and say, wait a minute, Johnny the researcher found 2 years ago that when the leaves fall in the fall, that more of this particular type of crime occurs. So now we know to look out for that during that particular time of year. But Johnny the researcher didn't go into his research with that particular application in mind. That's why it's pure. He's just trying to find out some knowledge. Whereas applied research is when you have something in mind already, an application, and you want to conduct a research to see if your theory is correct. And maybe you apply your theory to a situation and see if it works. So we want to have some kind of practical application in mind when you think about your homework assignment that you're going to have to do, or obviously writing assignment that hopefully you're due in the building on Friday. And you're going to look at this researcher by the name of Mary, who wants to start an after-school program. And one of the questions that's asked is whether this is applied or pure research. Well, when you understand the concept of applied research, you'll know that Mary's research project is applied research, because Mary is trying to use this program, this after-school program, to actually find out whether it will help solve the crime problem that they're having in the late afternoons, early evenings in this particular community. So her research is being applied directly to the problem. So she's not just getting information out of it, she's actually doing something with it at the time that she's doing the research. And therefore it is in fact applied. So I just gave you an answer to one of your questions for that homework assignment. Your mission is to explain why, which I just did as well, but I need you to understand the concept, so I need to see your explanation. Alright, and another way we categorize research is primary research and secondary research. And this is just kind of an ordinal thing. Primary research means that you, on your own, came up with an idea and you want to research it through direct investigation. In other words, you're going to go right into a particular group of people, a particular community, and you're going to conduct the research on your own. I gave you the example of the anthropologist that was working in the Kensington section of Philadelphia not too long ago. I believe they may actually still be there. They are doing primary research because they are down living in Kensington, and they're running into the drug dealers, they're running into the drug users on the street, they're running into the prostitutes, they're interacting with these people on a daily basis and keeping track of what's going on with these people. That is a direct investigation and is primary research. So whenever your researchers are directly involved in some way, that is primary research. Secondary research is when we look at something that somebody else did and we reevaluate it. That's secondary. So what you're going to be doing in your course project is going to be secondary research, because your mission in your course project is to find 5 sources that have something to do with whatever social dimension of crime that you picked, whether it be gender, age, social status, or race, ethnicity. You're picking one of those, and then you're going to find 5 sources from a criminological perspective that deal with one of those dimensions. And you're going to be finding those 5 sources, and these are other people that actually did research that looked at that particular topic, and you're going to evaluate what they said. And because you're looking at 5 different ones, you're going to evaluate the differences between them, the similarities between them, which is going to be the second part of your project. So the first part of your project, which is actually due in 2 weeks, week 4 of our class, is that you are going to be finding the 5 sources, and these are going to be scholarly academic sources. Matter of fact, the periodicals that I show you in class this week could be the type of stuff that you're looking at, but you can also find them through the virtual library, through the various databases that we have. There's lots of scholarly research out there. And I will definitely make sure that we review how to get that stuff, because it's very important. You're not just Googling and finding, some lame article about, the fact that males commit more crimes than females, from the newspaper. That's not enough. It has to be a real research study that you're going to look at and try to reevaluate. So basically, you are going to be conducting secondary research, looking at other people's prior work. All right, some stages in research. Well, just like any other problem-solving model, is you have to identify what the problem is. So a researcher is not just going to go out there and do research blindly without having identified a problem. In your homework assignment, Mary identified a problem, that there seems to be a higher amount of crime between, say, the hours of 5 and 7 in the evening. And she, in her theory, attributes this to the fact that there are many unsupervised teenagers and children out in the community during that time frame. So she is going to, having identified the problem, she's going to develop her research design, which is to actually conduct, in her respect, an applied research. It is primary and it is applied. It's primary because she's doing it herself. She came up with the idea, she came up with the concept, she created the research design, and it is applied because she's actually working with the group and she's actually making changes to society as a result of her ongoing research. She's not just standing aside watching somebody else do something. She's actually involved in the situation. So that's her research design. Third stage in research is choice of data collection techniques. So how is it that Mary's going to collect data for her research project, whether it's hers or maybe it's the guy in Kensington? They have to choose how they're going to do that. Are they going to conduct surveys? Are they going to look at crime data? Are they just going to talk to some of the people that are involved in the program? And we're going to look at the different collection strategies in a few minutes. But part of the stage of research is to choose what you have. And then after you have your data collected, you have to review the findings. Again, whether it's the findings of the crime data, the findings of the survey that you did of your participants, both before and after they were involved in your program, individual interviews of those people, whichever way you choose to collect your data, you then have to review it and look really, really hard at the findings. Experimental criminology is the use of social science techniques and theory testing to produce evidence-based findings. And we're going to hear a lot about evidence-based findings in criminal justice, because that is the way things are really, really moving. We're going to use science, and many criminologists use science now in a scientific method. But they have this area called experimental criminology, which that's their focus, is doing very scientific studies and coming up with evidence for whatever it is they're studying. And it's very important, because let's say your police department, if you become a police officer, decides to institute some anti-drug program, as an example. Everybody knows I was a DARE officer. Let's say they want to institute this program, but they don't look at the program and see what the results have been in other places. They don't, scientifically study it. They just say, hey, this sounds like a great thing, let's try it. It may, through studies, have great evidence, or it may not. But because more agencies want to get the best bang for their buck and make sure that they're not wasting money on programs, they're looking specifically for evidence-based programs. And the Department of Justice actually catalogs programs based upon studies that have been done about them, and will tell you what the evidence is behind the programs, and actually rate programs. This is an assignment that you'll get in your probation and parole class, but I'll introduce you to the website, if we can, during this week or one of the following weeks. And an organization that is involved in Experimental Criminology is the Academy of Experimental Criminology. Their periodical is called the Journal of Experimental Criminology, so that's where they publish the scientific research that is done by their members. Very similar to the document that I'm going to show you in class this week. All right, problem identification. Problem identification basically is choosing the problem or issue to be studied. Frequently involves testing something we call hypothesis. And a hypothesis is an explanation that accounts for a set of facts that can be tested by further investigation. Something that is taken to be true for the purpose of argument or investigation. So an hypothesis would say that I believe from my review of what goes on in the summertime that because more ice cream is sold in the summertime, that it contributes to the fact that more crime also occurs in the summertime. So that might be my explanation. Now, obviously, that explanation is ludicrous, but that's why we have a testing process to actually determine whether this explanation really does account for a set of facts. So we're going to have to look at it. Hypothesis testing. So we have concepts, and a hypothesis must be translated into variables. Concepts that can undergo measurable changes. That's what a variable is. So a variable, keep this definition in mind, is a concept that can undergo measurable changes. So it might be sales of ice cream versus arrests, and we could look at that data. And operationalization is when we can restate our hypothesis using words that make it testable. In other words, putting the numbers in to the hypothesis so that we can see if we can actually test it. A research design is the logic and structure inherent in any particular approach to data gathering. So it's going to be basically the plan. How is it that we're going to collect the information and data that we're going to use as part of our research study. It's going to give us a guide to our systematic collection of our data. Here's a research design, one of them. It's one group pre-test, post-test design. So when you look at this, and I'm sure somebody will have a question, can explain it further on the board in class, but you have the 0 with the subnumeral 1 is your group. It might be a group of prisoners. Your book talks about prisoners in a county jail somewhere, and we're going to make some change to procedures within the jail, and we're going to see if that results in anything. So maybe someone's hypothesis is that too much sugar provided to the inmates in the jail is causing the recent rash of violence within the facility. So what we're going to do is the X is going to be the change that we're going to make, and the change is we're going to eliminate sugar from the diet entirely. And then the 0 subnumeral 2 is that same group after we've implemented the change. And we're going to look to see if there was a decrease in the amount of violence. So your hypothesis might be that if we reduce the amount of sugar fed to our inmates 100%, we will decrease crime or violence within the facility by 75%. Might say 100, but let's say 75. And so as part of our research, we're going to look to see if that happened. So we're going to conduct that over a period of time. Obviously, the pre-test is the people beforehand. The X is the time period where we've removed the sugar from their diet. And the O2 is after a period of time, whether it be 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever. And we may do this in stages as well to see if there is that reduction that we're talking about. Now, in this one group pre-test, post-test design, there's an inherent problem here. And who can think of it? Is intake of sugar the only thing that might impact on a level of violence within this facility? Certainly not. Is it the only thing that may increase violence? Is taking the sugar away the only thing that might decrease violence within a facility? Certainly not. What if you had a new chaplain come into the facility, and this chaplain, during the same time that we were reducing the amount of sugar given to our inmates, this new chaplain started some working groups, some focus groups, some meetings with the inmates, and he also went in and talked to them on a regular basis? How do we know that if we see a decrease in violence later on, that decrease is not related to the chaplain as opposed to the sugar? And that chaplain is what we would call a confounding effect. In other words, something else that's going to have an impact on our study that we have not accounted for. Validity is a very important part of any study. And as I mentioned, confounding effects, our study may not really be valid if we try to say, well, look, we reduced the amount of sugar and our inmates got less violent, without thinking about all the other things that might have impacted them at the same time. So internal validity is the certainty that our experimental interventions did indeed cause the changes observed in the study group. Now, that confounding effect of the pastor or the chaplain coming in could raise a question as to whether our study was actually internally valid. External validity is about the ability to generalize our research findings to other settings. So if the limitation on sugar in prison A reduced violence, can we take that same idea to prison B, and will it work? That's external validity. Can I take that research finding to a totally different environment, maybe another facility, another jail, another prison, whatever, and will it work there as well? That's in external validity. All right, some threats to our internal validity, and definitions of all these are in your textbook. But what's the history of the person, their interaction with others, maturation? People will get more mature during your study period, and maybe that will change them. Testing, the actual what goes on during the testing may actually impact people's reactions. Instrumentation, is the equipment that you're using to measure going to make changes? Is it accurate? Statistical regression, when we're looking at how things just change over time, regardless of what we do. Differential selection, if we're doing this study in the prison system, we're probably not going to study every single member of the facility. So who do we pick? And that could be a problem. If we don't pick the right people, or we don't have a random sample, maybe we pick the folks that will cause our study to come out the way we want it to come out. It's just like I think I mentioned before. If you go into a church where everybody is a teetotaler and nobody drinks, and you do a study about the effects of alcohol, what are you going to get? As opposed to, you're studying people that pretty much live in a bar, you're going to get a totally different result. So your sample has to be random to include people from across the spectrum to see how things work. And then there's experimental mortality. Well, how long is the study going to be? Some of the studies that you're going to read about, whether it be regard to drug prevention programs in the schools, violence prevention programs in communities, in prisons, wherever, have experimental mortality. You're going to hear about some researchers that followed groups of teenagers from, say, 16 on up as they got older to see how their changes in their life might affect their involvement in crime. Well, some of those people are going to die. It doesn't necessarily always mean death. If you're in a prison study, some of those people are going to be released, so they're no longer in your study, so they're not going to count later on. So experimental mortality basically just talks to the fact that some people in your study are going to disappear. either through death or being removed from the area where the study's taking place, like the guy in Kensington. Maybe he's following specific prostitutes, specific drug dealers, specific drug users that live in a neighborhood, and people die, people might move away, drug dealers might get arrested. All those different things happen, and those people disappear from the study. External validity. Again, we have reactive effects to testing. How do the people react if you walk up to somebody on the street and you ask them if they want to be involved in a survey? Does that make them want to answer in a certain way if they know what your study's about? Self-selection. The person, as we talked about in class last week, you have these studies, the people with the clipboards in the mall that might walk up to people and say, hey, can I talk to you a moment? Well, there's some people that volunteer for that stuff. So maybe there's a survey going on with regard to violence, or maybe it's a sleep study, or there's all kinds of medical studies that go on. Some people choose to get involved in these studies, and the fact that they choose, they may already have an agenda, they may already have an idea, and the fact that they chose to be involved in the study may affect the outcome. Reactive effects of experimental arrangements. What are the arrangements? Are you actually conducting a closed study where people are going to be living in a certain environment? Is that environment going to affect how they react? There's a classic study that was a prison study years ago where they took a bunch of college kids and they put them in a dorm. They made it out to be like a prison, and some of them were the prisoners and others were the corrections officers, or jail guards as I think they called them in the study. And the arrangements had an effect on the people. So your external validity can be affected by that. And I think I mentioned this already with regard to the impact of someone else dealing with your people that are in your study at the same time. So let's say you're doing a study on violence in the prison system, like I said. You're taking away sugar, thinking that's going to have an effect, but at the same time people are getting counseling. They're in groups with the new chaplain. There's some other program that goes on. This is multiple treatment interference, where you have multiple things going on that will affect the outcome, and then you can't be sure whether your study is really valid or not. All right, experimental and quasi-experimental research designs. Controlled experiments. So you can think about, a chemist in a lab where basically they can control everything. And this is what a controlled experiment is. It's very hard to do that in the social sciences, obviously, because we're dealing with people that are moving around. But if we do like that prison experiment that I mentioned earlier, the college experiment, we put all those people into a specific environment, and that was attempted to control it. You'll hear about that in psychology. It's mentioned in your psychology class. It didn't go well. And I may try to look up some of the video from it and possibly introduce you to it during our class this week. But that was an attempt to control the environment. Because if you actually go into a real prison, that's not a controlled environment, because you cannot control. And I don't think in criminology, it's very hard to control in criminology, completely control your environment to make sure that everything is constant and you don't have any impacts from other places. That's control. Quasi-experiments is when you give the researcher control of when and whom of measurement, but not exposure. So again, if you're that guy in Kensington who is dealing with people out in the field, they know who they're going to deal with, they know when they're going to deal with them, but they don't know what they're going to be exposed to in the community. So it's what we would call a quasi-experiment. Experimental design. We mentioned the pre-test, post-test control group design. The previous slide, you had 0 with a subnumeral 1 and 0 with a subnumeral 2. In this slide, we look at it a little bit differently. We give it a 1 and a 2, and a 3 and a 4. What we have here is your experimental group is in the 0-1 stage is the time before you did anything, before you expose them to any kind of treatment or intervention, like the sugar that we removed from the inmates. So the X is the change, and the 2 is what they were like at the end of the study. A control group is someone that a group of people that you pull out as a sample, and you don't give them that same intervention. You do not remove their sugar if you're in that prison study, and you see if there's any changes to that group, because that helps you then to see, well, maybe there were some other things that were going on that impacted them. Kind of just like a drug study. When you have a company doing a drug study to see what the effects of a certain new drug is, say on allergies, on any number of things, diseases, whatnot, they use control groups as well. So they'll have people that are receiving the drug therapy, and they'll have people that are receiving what we call a placebo. So they're taking a pill that has nothing in it, and we're going to see if those people changed at the same rate or different or not at all than the experimental group. Randomization. I mentioned this a couple of times already. It's very important whenever you're doing a research study or you're doing a survey. Look at our presidential election press that's all over the place. We're not going to elect a new president until 2016, but there's all kinds of surveys that are being done, polls that are being done with regard to, who do you think is going to be the best president? Who do you think is most likely in the Republican Party to beat Hillary Clinton should she become the nominee? And you see all these surveys. And in order to really get valid results, you have to have what we call random samples. Because in most surveys, you can't get everyone. A survey company or a college or a newspaper that's doing a survey about the presidential election is not going to call up every single household. Just like the National Crime Victimization Survey is not going to call up every single household and ask them, with regard to the presidential election, who do you think is the best candidate? You can't call every household. That's what the election's for. It's just something that would be time-consuming, cost-prohibitive. There's all kinds of reasons why you just can't do it. So you need a random sample. That random sample is going to hopefully reflect the entire body that you want to interpret for. So if you're trying to figure out the presidential election in the United States, you want a random sample that's going to include people from the variety of persuasions, variety of race, ethnicity, gender, that's going to reflect, hopefully, what the actual population is. And this randomization is very important. It's essential for experimental designs, and it helps to control threats to internal validity. As I mentioned, if you do your study on alcohol only with people who live in a bar, you're going to get one result, versus if you go to a church where part of the culture is they're not allowed to drink, you're going to get another result. So you want to have a random sample that covers all the bases. All right, techniques of data collection. I mentioned this earlier, and in your homework assignment, when you're talking about Mary, and again, homework. I said homework. I'm giving you time, probably from about 12:30 to 1 o'clock, to actually do this assignment, and it shouldn't take you more than 45 minutes to an hour to complete the assignment. For most of you, I know some of you it might take a little bit longer, if you want to do a little bit more research and really get into it, but to knock out, like 2 pages on Mary and answer the questions properly, an hour should be sufficient. So you'll have that time. At no later than 1 o'clock we'll break for you to do this assignment. One of the questions that's asked is, what would be the best way for Mary to collect the data with regard to her research? So remember, Mary's doing a study of crime that's occurring in this community in the late afternoon, early evening. She thinks if she can do some applied research, her primary applied research, that starts a after-school program, and she wants to see if there's any change in the crime problem in the community once she gets kids involved in her after-school program. So somehow she's going to have to document, and she's going to have to select a strategy. So that's where these strategies are very important. And depending upon the type of research you're doing, There's a variety of different ways to do it. When you pick it, it's going to be based upon, how easy or how hard it is to do, how simple it is, what's it going to cost me. That's why you don't have somebody calling up every single household to do the National Crime Victimization Survey. They decide we're going to do so many households, this is what our budget is, and that's what we're going to get. How much time is it going to take? Is there any form required for our data? What do we want the data to look like after we do the data collection? And what the data is supposed to look like afterwards may determine how you collect it. All right, there's 5 main data gathering strategies. Those are surveys, which most of us are probably very familiar with, case studies, which is looking at one person over time, which is what most of your serial killer studies are. Participant observation was when somebody actually gets involved and works within the group that you're studying. Self-reporting is kind of like a survey, but you're going to go and you're going to look at someone and interview them on a single person basis, and which we do a lot in our prison systems, by the way, is people go in and they try to find out about burglary, about robbery, violent crime, whatever, by interviewing the people that have been arrested for it. And then lastly is secondary analysis, which is basically secondary research. That the data gathering strategy of secondary analysis goes hand in hand with secondary research, is that I'm not doing my own research. I am looking at others' research on this same topic and seeing what they had to say. And sometimes that is the entire research project, is we're looking at 12 other people that studied this over time, and we want to look at what they all came up with and try to reevaluate it. Where the secondary analysis might also be part of a larger project, in that many, and you'll see that in the documents that I'm going to give you in class this week, many researchers do a review of existing studies. They look at a literature review. They look at what's out there already, who studied this already. I want to study it on my own, in my own way, but I want to see what other people came up with as well. That's a literature review. Kind of like what you're going to be doing for the first part of your project, is you're going to be pulling up 5 different pieces of scholarly documentation and coming up with an abstract of each of them, or summary. And that's what is done in a lot of research. They look at what went before, and then they go into what they want to do as far as their own research. All right, surveys. Surveys, we're probably all very familiar with surveys. Usually use questionnaires to gather data. It could be the face-to-face in the mall. It could be somebody knocking on your door in your house. Can I conduct a survey? Can I ask you a few questions? It might be, the telephone survey, where you're sitting home, watching your favorite show, and the phone rings and a person says, hey, mind if I ask you a few questions about the upcoming election? And you may agree to do that. It might be a mail survey, where you open up a letter and there's this, fill out this survey. Funny thing about mail surveys, I think probably 90% of the mail surveys that I get are from organizations that really just want you to give them a donation. So, you go through the whole mail survey, and the last question of the survey, do you agree to send us, whatever money to support the cause? And it turns me off right away. I'm like, do I even want to bother to send a survey in, or I just want to throw this thing in my recycling bin? But mail surveys is, through the old-fashioned snail mail, you open it up. You also can get surveys sent to you in email or fax. I don't know if there's too many fax people going around nowadays, but email for sure. And the email surveys, usually it's a link to a website where you then do the survey online. Kind of like, when you went to our Edmodo page and you took that first quiz, that was, to me, it was a survey. I should have used a poll function, which I did use a poll function to judge our first class, and so far only 5 of you have answered. A little disappointing there, but so please let me know, because nobody said it sucked yet, but if somebody said what we did in class wasn't that great for them, I want to know, so that we can do it better next time. I think I'm on the right track, but I need you to inform me. So surveys sent in email, I actually get and participate in some of these, and some of them you get to gather points and then you can use those points to cash them in for something. That's what a lot of them are. Usually they're product surveys. But you can use surveys for a variety of things. I have gotten surveys from a couple of the criminological organizations that wanted to know my opinions. I've had people who were working on their PhD who happened to find me as a member of certain organizations that sent me their survey, and it takes me to an online thing like SurveyMonkey or something else that allows you to do their survey, and then they can get the results. So surveys produce survey data. It might be, what's public opinion. That's why we talked about the presidential election. That's public opinion, who's the best candidate. It might be a study on fear of crime, attitudes and perceptions, and sometimes police agencies will do this. All kinds of other agencies might do it to see how are we doing. When I was the chairperson for our local Municipal Drug Alliance in Mount Laurel, one of the things that we did was we tried to put a survey out there to find out, what were the people's biggest concerns with regard to drug use and overdoses and all those kind of things, so that we could then try to figure out what programs we really needed to fund in our community, because the Municipal Drug Alliance basically got money through a state grant, and we had to develop programs using the amount of money that they were going to give us there. It's like $10,000 to $20,000 a year that we got. So some of that money might have gone into DARE program. Some of it might have gone into public education for adults and children. Some of it, we actually created a guidebook for senior citizens to avoid mixing their medications and getting sick from that. And there were all kinds of things that we did, but we started off with a survey to find out what people thought that we needed. And what we called that, it was part of a needs assessment, and the survey was a big part of it. Case studies is in-depth investigations into individual cases. It's basically a life history, but you have a single subject is the focus of the case study. I mentioned to you already, in class I have a book, the new book called Manson. It is a biography of Charles Manson. That would be a very in-depth case study. Those of you that have looked at books and documentation on serial killers know that serial killers are all case studies. You have the life history of the person. What did they do? Why did Ted Bundy eventually do what he did? How was he raised as a kid? What happened here? What happened there? Those are all case studies, individual stories. Yeah, they're very subjective because we're looking at one person, but at the same time, it allows us to look at these individual cases in a lot of depth. So get the book Manson, because that's really awesome. Participant observation is, as I said, a researcher observes a group by participating to varying degrees in the activities of the group. They may just go, maybe to group meetings. Matter of fact, when I was doing my master's in criminal justice, one of the things that I had to do was go to an AA meeting. And while I was at the AA meeting, I had to interact with the folks, and then I had to do a report afterwards. So I was simply an observer, a real participant observer. So I just went and watched. I, to some degree, participated, but not a great deal. So I would still say I was an observer. Or the observer may become a complete participant. It gets a little dangerous if what you're studying is criminal. If you want to go find out how biker gangs work, and you go and you join the biker gang, which of course we've had undercover law enforcement officers from FBI agents, police officers, what have you, that have done that very thing. And it's a dangerous prospect, because then you have to make the choice. How do I not do the crime stuff but still maintain my credibility with this group? So, you got to watch how far you go. But we've had newspaper people, we've had police officers, and certainly criminologists are doing the same thing. The anthropologist in Kensington that I mentioned earlier. All right, here we have probably a range from a participant to a participant as an observer, or a complete participant, because obviously he and his assistants that are they actually live in a house in Kensington. They are living in the community. They are interacting with the people on a daily basis. So they are participating in the community. They know what's going on in the community. So at one level, they are complete participants because they are doing the exact same thing that any other resident in the community might be doing. Now, hopefully, well, I shouldn't say hopefully, but I'm assuming they're not getting involved in the drug trade. They're not, sending their researchers out to be prostitutes or to buy the prostitutes, whatever. So they're not participating to that level as complete participants. But they are complete participants in the sense that they are participating as regular members of the community, not just people that pull up on the street and watch. Self-reporting, again I mentioned this, subjects are asked to report rates of certain behaviors such as crime. It can help us when official records might be lacking. We already talked last week about the fact that maybe the crime data we have only tells us about certain crimes. NCVS might be a survey, but it also might be considered self-reporting. More likely is self-reporting. Sometimes they will have researchers that will go into the prison system and they'll sit down with people who have been involved and they're charged with specific crimes, and they will find out from them their entire history. And that will give us information that didn't make it to the criminal records because they weren't caught for every crime they committed. They weren't charged with every crime they committed. But now this researcher who doesn't have an axe to grind with them and is not likely to lock them up, and they've already sworn, that they're going to keep their identity or whatever private. You have certain ethical considerations. You may find out a lot about stuff that you didn't know existed, and there's some great stuff out there with regard to these studies, and we found out through some of these studies that there's a lot of crime that we've missed. Because again, crime doesn't get reported, and when we do catch somebody, maybe we only wind up charging them for a portion, because maybe the interviewer or the interrogator didn't do a great job because they didn't get them to confess to everything they did. They only got them to confess to what they caught them for. So here we have introspection, personal reflection techniques, and it's purely subjective, obviously, because you're interviewing somebody and asking them, well, you're in here for sexual assault on children. Tell us about how that developed. Tell us about, all the involvement. How many people did you assault and what have you. And this person may go one of two ways. They could blow up the story to make themselves really look good, or if it's one of these sexual perverts, they blow up the story because they get off telling the story, or they may be, holding it in. Either way, even with a self-report, you may not get the full story. Alright, secondary analysis, very simple. New analysis or evaluation of existing data gathered by other people. So kind of like your project, you're going to be looking at other people's stuff and then you're going to analyze it. The second part of your project is, after you've read all of the 5 sources, and you have several weeks to do that, after you've read the 5 sources, you're going to have to compare and contrast those sources and tell us what you think about the topic based upon the research that you've done. So secondary analysis is very simple. It's going and looking at the work of others and then reanalyzing or reevaluating that information. Alright, some problems. Problems in data collection. Our scientific observation must meet 2 criteria. One is what we call intersubjectivity. For observations to be valid, independent observers must report seeing the same thing under the same circumstances. So, maybe we have 2 different observers, or we have different observers at different times who are looking at the same thing. The intersubjectivity says they should have the same result. Replicability is when the same conditions exist, the same results can be expected. Observations meeting these criteria may still lead to unwarranted conclusions because, again, things could turn a different direction based upon some other effect. Data analysis. Now this is something I really love, and that's a little sarcastic because when I started my master's program in criminal justice, the first course that I had to take was statistics. lots of numbers, lots of not to say theories, lots of mathematical calculations, lots of formulas that you had to use to determine, what the statistics actually meant. So we have what we call descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics describe, summarize, and highlight the relationships within the data. So we're looking at how are the numbers related to each other, whether there's a central tendency to them, is there a standard, and there's calculations for this. What is the standard deviation? And you actually look at this when you see some of these political polls. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, and plus or minus 2%. So you may have what's known as a deviation. And then correlation. How does the data correlate with each other? You're going to look at those things. Inferential statistics is the attempt to generalize findings by specifying how likely they are to be true for other populations or locations. And there's actually formulas that you use on your data to test for significance. And keep in mind, this is not a statistics course. Those of you that go on to bachelor's, and certainly if you go on to a master's, you will get into these types of things and understand in fine detail what they are. We're not going to get into that. You can obviously look in the book and get a better understanding about what these measures are, but we're really not going to go much further with them. Quantitative versus qualitative methods. All right, fairly simply, quantitative numbers. Techniques to produce measurable results can be analyzed statistically. Now, keep in mind, there's a mystique of quantity. If you say 90% of the white males that were arrested for homicide were convicted, does that tell us something or not? Sometimes the numbers just make people think, oh my God, yeah. And maybe we have to look at it a different way. But quantitative methods, basically, anytime that you're producing some type of measurable results, so we can say that based upon our research, we know that 40% of this particular population is likely to be involved in crime by the time that they're 25. Or we know that 90% of people who committed crimes will stop committing crimes by the time they're 30. And I just made that number up. That's not the real number. There is probably several numbers out there for that regard, but that's what we're talking about, measure results. Qualitative results is when we're talking about subjective results, or results that we really can't put numbers on. So we're going to say, results of our survey that, it looks like we would get a reduction in crime if this happened. But you couldn't come up with numbers. That's qualitative. All right, ethics, values and ethics. Very important. Obviously, we want to make sure that everything that we're doing with regard to our research is above board. We want to make sure that nobody is harmed or hurt during the course of our research. We want to make sure that our research is honest, that we're not falsifying anything. That's all about values and ethics. And values come into all stages of the research process. And no research is free from preconceptions and biases. We have to be aware of that. If you are going in to study a certain topic, you all have certain biases based upon your upbringing, based upon your own race, ethnicity, gender, whatever, that cause us to possibly think a certain way. We have to acknowledge that, and then we can go into our study and hopefully address whatever biases that we have, so that they don't affect the honest results that we want to come up with. So the most effective way to control the effects of biases is be aware of them at the onset of the research. Know ahead of time that you have a bias towards a certain type of people when you're doing a study, so you make sure that you don't let that bias impact the study itself. And interestingly, I've heard of studies where somebody goes in with a bias and they come out losing the bias because they found out through the research that what they thought was true or what they were raised believing was not true. And maybe one of you will pick something that you already have a bias about, whether it be about certain races, certain genders, ethnicities, social status, and during your research you'll find maybe that what you believed doesn't really stand up through prior research. Ethical issues do not affect validity, but may impact the lives of researchers and subjects. So again, we don't want to have anybody harmed. Protection of human subjects. The college study from years ago, psychology with the corrections officers and the students pretending to be prisoners, got to a point where people could have been hurt, and that was one of the issues with regard to ethics in that particular study. So we want to make sure that we're not doing something in our study that may hurt somebody, whether it is from release of information that may harm them psychologically or emotionally, or actual physical repercussions of the study. And one of the ways that we deal with that is through maintaining privacy. We want to make sure that people know up front how we're going to be doing our research, so we need to disclose to them up front. And it could be as very simple as when we did a pre-test in our DARE program in our school system, we had a form that the students had to read and understand. Sometimes when you do drug surveys, you send a form home to the parents, and that form, sometimes they have to opt in, or other times it's more simply is they have to opt out. So if you send a survey, you send a letter out telling parents, okay, we are going to be providing on such and such a day, we're going to be doing a survey of all your kids, and if anybody doesn't want your child to participate, you need to send this letter back with your signature. Then we're going to be disclosing in that letter what the methods are. We also have the concept of data confidentiality. What data are we going to release? What information are we going to release? If we're looking at a small sample, will people be able to identify who that you're actually talking about, and will that be harmful to them? So confidentiality is going to be an important thing you're going to look at with regard to research. Informed consent, kind of just talked about this. You may have a form that people have to read and sign off on before they do your research, and this is one way that we overcome the ethical issues, is that we tell them exactly what we're doing, we tell them exactly what we expect of them and how they're going to participate, and we tell them what we're going to do with the information at the end of it, so that the people that participate in the study are totally aware of all of the parts of the study all the way through and all the ramifications. Can you do this all the time? Probably not, but in some cases you can. So that this is one way, again, you can overcome ethical issues by totally informing people who are involved what's going to happen, how it's going to affect them, and what we're going to do with it afterwards. Institutional review boards. As you look at the books that I'm going to give you in class on Friday, you'll see that you have an organization that reviews the people's research studies. You may have this at the college level, at a specific university. If someone who is, say, working on their PhD in a certain college, someone who is already a professor at a college and wants to do additional research, usually there is an organization within the college or university that has to review what they want to do and approve it before they're permitted to do it. So again, it could be a university, it could be a research organization, government agency. Basically, there's a group of people that you have to present your idea to, how you want to do it, and they have to determine whether you should do it or not. They're going to look at the ethical conduct. They want to make sure that you're meeting whatever standards that organization has before they're going to give you money to do it, before they're going to approve you to do it. Alright, so now we move into what I think is probably the most important part of criminology, is addressing public policy that might come out of our research. And we would hope that research is going to have an impact on public crime control policy. Because if you do valid research, you do ethical research, you've gotten a good random sample, you've done everything right, then your findings should hopefully inform us and let us know that, hey, this causes this, and if you change this, it's going to make this change and reduce crime or reduce drug use or whatever. One would hope that that would happen. Realistically, it does not always happen. Whether it's public officials that have no idea what kind of research is going on. They're ignorant of the research. Maybe our members of Congress, our state assembly, they don't know what the current research is with regard to that topic. So they come up with their own, idea. We're going to have midnight basketball, and this is going to solve our crime problem, without knowing whether or not this is evidence-based, that it actually does have any effect whatsoever. Just like people might buy into what the current fad program might be without knowing whether it's actually effective or not. On the other hand, public officials may know but choose to ignore, whether it's because they have their own agenda and they want to force their own agenda regardless of what the research findings say, or for other reasons. Maybe it's to be politically expedient. Maybe if we were to apply what came out through the research, it would take us so much longer to get this done. And we don't have the time. We need to put something in now because, you know what? I'm due for re-election next month. And I got to do something now that's going to make the public think that I'm working on crime. Even though the research says that whatever it is that you're going to throw in now, like maybe we're going to quickly pass another gun control law, we may find out through research that that would have absolutely no effect whatsoever. So that's another issue. And the last one is research may be at odds with public sentiment. The research may find out that if we do A, it reduces B, and the people out there thinking, no way, that can't possibly be right. So then you got a point where somebody has to have the courage to be able to educate and let people know that yes, in fact, this will work. But public officials are more likely to do what the public wants them to do because that's who elected them. Every once in a while you have somebody who's willing to stand up and take the risk that they're going to do what they know to be right as opposed to what the public thinks is right. But that doesn't happen all that often. All right, writing a research report. You're going to be writing a basic research report. It might not have all of these parts. You're going to look in class on Friday at an actual research report. You're going to pick one that has a subject that you like, and you're going to look at it. And this is what, these are all, the ones you're looking at are all in periodicals, and they may not look exactly like the format suggested here. But if you look at the Purdue OWL, and you look at their APA guide, there's actually an example of a research report, and it shows you exactly what all these things look like. But basically, you start off with a title page that gives you the title of what it is. Acknowledgments is, who helped you with it, whether it be the editor, whether it be your researchers, list all the people, because it's like one person or two people are taking credit for the work, but there's probably a lot of other people that helped them out, and we want to acknowledge who those people are. If you're a researcher doing this thing. Obviously, you, on the other hand, are not going to have all these people helping you. But if I'm conducting a major criminological study, I'm not doing it on my own. There might be, 30, 40, 50, even hundreds of people involved in helping you do this study. The next thing is a table of contents. Everybody who reads a book, you look at your textbook, they have tables of contents. Preface is just a brief thing about where we came from, where we're going, why are we doing this. Abstract is basically a summary of the entire document. An introduction is just that. It's an introduction to the research and what it is that we did. The literature review, as I mentioned earlier, is looking at what other researchers who looked at this same topic did previously. What did their research come up with? A description of the existing situation. Remember we said identify the problem. So part of a research report for a criminological researcher is describing what exactly is going on in society today with regard to what it is they're studying. So Mary, if she's writing a research report for her research on this after-school issue, she's going to describe the crime data, the fact that all these students are released from school at whatever time they're released, and they're unsupervised, and she's going to get into all these different things. That's going to be her description of the existing situation. Then her statement of hypothesis, is suggesting that she believes that the fact that these children are out during these times of day unsupervised contributes to the crime problem. Description of the research plan is when the person describes how it is they're going to conduct the research, what it is they're going to do. Any disclaimers and limitations, that's the legal mumbo jumbo that says, obviously we're not able to address this, we're not able to address that, stuff like that. Analysis and discussion. This is when we look at, what was the outcome of our research through whatever research design that we had, whatever method of data collection that we had, what was the result? And they discuss in detail, maybe multiple pages of discussion of what the result were. And then you have your summary and conclusions, where they summarize what they found, and they make some conclusions. They might say, we recommend this, we recommend that, whatever. Appendixes, you may have some reproductions of some of their data that they decide to put at the end, and some other informative documents that they add that are not actually part of their report that help to inform you with regard to the topic. List of their references, just like we talked about that in your papers, anything you do for class, you have to have a list of references. And then what we call endnotes. In some methods of doing research, rather than having specific references within your text like you'd have to do, they may have a number in the text rather than the name and the date. They'll have a number in the text that then refers to the endnotes. So if you look as you're reading through their report and you see number 19 in parentheses next to a sentence, you know that if you go to the back and you look at the endnotes, number 19 will tell you which reference that came from. All right, ready for publication? As I said, I'm going to give you some journals to look at. These are called referee journals. These are peer reviewers gauge the quality of the manuscripts, and then that's how these things get into the journal that you're going to read in class. That's a referee journal, and they have certain submission requirements. They may tell them, specific things that they have to do with their research, length, number of people involved, whatever the organization requires for submission requirements. I get emails periodically from different groups that are looking for items, articles, presentations, whatever, to be submitted for conferences that I might be able to go to and stuff like that. And they all come with requirements for submitting. Is there a certain font that they want you to use, a certain length they want you to use, size, and a lot of other things. Alright, so to summarize, research could be very interesting, especially in applied research where you're actually doing something that may have an effect on society right now. Remember, pure research is basically when it's in the process of trying to find out answers to questions. Remember, primary research is when you're doing it on your own for the first time with your own ideas, where secondary research is simply looking back at other people's research and doing a reevaluation of it. Those four concepts are very important with regard to the assignment, Mary's research project, because questions address that. Is it applied or pure research that she's doing? Is it a little bit of both? I'd say it's definitely applied, and she's going to get information from it, but it's applied research. It's also primary in that she came up with her own idea as to what she was going to study. She developed her own research design, all those things. Will she have some secondary aspects? More than likely, because I would expect that she would research prior programs, prior after-school programs, what's been the effect of after-school programs in other areas. All those things would be, a secondary analysis is one of her data collection techniques, would be a secondary analysis. Remember, there's like 5 different data collection techniques, including surveys, case studies, self-reporting, All of those, very important to understand what they are. So don't forget to review the textbook. This is Chapter 3. Remember, we will be having a quiz on Chapters 1 through 3 later in the day. And I will introduce you to the textbook website, which I neglected to do last week, which actually has all the quiz questions that I use. So if you go in and you actually take the quizzes on that site, you will know all the answers for all my quizzes. And hopefully you'll learn from doing that. And if you don't do well, take the quiz over. You can take those quizzes on that website as many times as you like. So I look forward to seeing your responses in the discussion group. I'll be posting that later today as well. Question with regard to the benefit of criminological research and how it informs public policy. And I'm going to ask you to look at a specific article that was published in National Review magazine, which addresses some of the uses of research for the positive and the negative, or maybe the misuse of data and research. So those are some of the topics that are going to be part of your discussion question that will be posted for week 2. So, see you soon. Bye-bye. All right, hello. This is our week 2 summary based upon Chapter 3 in your textbook. I just wanted to reiterate that you do need to go through the chapter. Also you can look up in the glossary any of the terms like applied, pure, primary, secondary. Look up the different methods of data collection that were discussed, and make sure that you're on target with all those things. Keep in mind also that we're planning to have a quiz on chapters 1 through 3. That will probably be just for your benefit at the beginning of class in week 3. So chapters 1 through 3 will have a quiz at the beginning of class in week 3. There will be no in-class review for that. You have to just go through the videos, and I will introduce you this week to the website that goes along with your textbook. If you look at the beginning of the textbook, it's actually listed there, but I will show you exactly how to get to it so that it's nice and simple. And all of the quiz questions that I use are located right there. So just a quick reminder, what we're going to do, make sure you come prepared to talk about some current event in criminal justice. There's some very interesting things that have happened in the past week. By the time I see you on Friday, I will have discussed in my criminal investigation class the shootings in Phoenix, Arizona, and the young man down there that was recently arrested, and his claim that he's innocent because he didn't have the gun. There's some questions, essential questions I'm going to be asking my criminal investigation class about that. We're going to be discussing your media and public perception of crime assignment, and reviewing the overview of criminology and how we measure crime. Then I'm going to introduce you to our course project, which is about the social dimensions of crime. Then we're going to be getting into the lecture that you just watched, any questions that you might have. So if you didn't write them down now. Anything that you need clarification on, I will make sure to differentiate between applied and pure research, because that always gets people confused. And primary and secondary research is also very important. Then I'm going to give you copies of research reports. You're going to look at these various periodicals that I'll bring to class. Pick one. You're going to select the research report. You're going to review it. You're going to summarize it in about 1 to 2 pages in class. I'll give you like about 45 minutes to do so, and you're going to come back to class with that. Then we're going to discuss how research and data is used, and hopefully a little bit of more information based upon your discussion group question that'll be posted later today with regard to the use of data and criminological research and on all those kind of things. Then you'll be released to do your writing assignment, which is that Mary's research project, which will be due the following week in class. And as I mentioned previously, the homework assignment basically is about a criminological researcher by the name of Mary who has identified, her problem identification is that there is a crime problem that occurs in this particular community in the late afternoon, early evening hours. That coincides with the time when the students have been released from the middle school and the high school, and they are out and about in the neighborhoods unsupervised because parents are maybe working till 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and the kids are not supervised. So even if some of them go home, certainly, but then there's others that are out in the street and doing things which may be causing the problems in the community. That's her hypothesis of what she believes. So she's doing this project, which is an applied research project, where she's going to be running an after-school program. She needs to get kids into the program and try to see if that has any effect. So you're going to be answering some basic questions. I won't go into all of them, but one of them has to do with whether her research is applied or pure, and also whether it's primary or secondary. And if you did watch the lecture, you already know the answers to both of those questions. So hopefully you did, and you know. But you're going to have to explain why. Don't just say, yes, it is. No, say, okay, why is Mary's research applied? What is she doing that makes this applied research? Why is Mary's research considered to be primary? Are there any parts of her research that are considered secondary? Is she doing any secondary analysis of prior research or data with regard to that very same crime problem? So you're going to do that, and hopefully you will finish it and hand it in, because it's very important that you stay, especially in this class, because they're basically a writing assignment every week, although I would guess that none of them should take you more than an hour to do, which means that if I give you an hour every week to do them, then everybody should be up to date on their homework assignments, and everybody's going to get an A or a B in the course, unless, of course, you're a total idiot and you don't come out and ask for help when you don't understand things. And like I said, that has nothing to do with whether you understand it or not, because I believe that if you put the effort in, whether you understand the information or not, you can be successful. Because if you don't understand it, you can come to me and we'll discuss it, and I will explain it to you in more detail and try to help you to understand that information, and hopefully you'll walk away with that understanding. So you have to use that resource, and that's another good reason why the assignments are being done during class time, so that you have me as a resource, so that you can ask the questions for those things that you don't understand, so that you can do this thing to top notch. Because again, for me, looking at you, I know some of you like, oh, well, I have to have an A all the time. And some of you, well, I just got to pass the class. For me, it's that you learn from the class, because these things, regardless of whether you're going to be a police officer or you're going to get your master's or doctorate in criminology, these are basic things that will affect you in your careers regardless. So let's try to make the best effort to do it well. So I look forward to seeing you. Don't forget, you can reach out to me anytime, email, text, phone call, whatever, and I'll try to help you and answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much, and I will see you all on Friday.